Jairaj, of course, former additional chief secretary. There's no job in Karnataka that he has not done. He's been a remarkable civil servant and has led from the front. But in the context of the PI 2020, few might know that he was the pioneer of Sakala. The long before the other states spoke about delivery of services on time at one location at a central point. Karnataka had already taken steps, and Jairaj was, I think, one of the key members of the team, along with Mr. S.V. Ranganath and others, who actually pioneered Sakala in Karnataka. Sir, if you could lead the way from the perspective of growth or whatever else you think struck you as far as PI 2020 was concerned.
Thank you very much, Guru. And first, I'd like to thank the Public Affairs Foundation and the IIPA for giving me this opportunity to be present. Thank you. In particular, I owe a debt of gratitude to our esteemed Mr. S. Ramanathan and Jeevan Kumar for this opportunity. I'd also like to greet our esteemed seniors, Mr. Sudhakar Rao, S.V. Ranganath. And in particular, I'd like to commend the leadership and initiative taken by my dear friend Guru Charan in steering PAC through these times. I think it's appropriate on this occasion that we also remember Dr. Samuel Paul, because Sam Paul, apart from being the founder of PAC, was a person who pioneered governance studies in India. And today, if it has acquired a kind of respectability, it is entirely owing to the untiring work done by Dr. Sam Paul. I also want to make a comment about the way PAI has been constructed, the methodological rigor, the data-based verification, and the complete absence of bias in the entire study. As was explained and as we have read in the report, that is truly something that we can be proud of. To those of my colleagues in the government who think that this is another arcane piece of research, academic research which can, be consigned to some corner, I would like to say think otherwise, because this study has great pointers of action. And if you are a discerning person, you can look at this study and discern the essential points in this study and try to bring it into the workplace. I would like to give one such example from my own experience. Way back, 20 years ago, when I was commissioner of BMP for the first time, Sam Paul had released the report card on public services. I think Guru may remember that, and other colleagues in PAC may also remember that. That was, I believe, the first report card released on mapping public services in India, and it was referred to Bangalore City. And there what came home to me with great force was that the people in the city of Bangalore had ranked property tax collection as being the foremost cause for corruption. So following from that study, we undertook a mission of trying to overhaul the property tax system in Bangalore City, and thanks to all the efforts put in by my colleagues and the support of the Honorable Chief Minister, there was a radical overhaul of the property tax system in the form of a self-assessment scheme of property taxes, which has now come to stay in this city and in the state. So there is a lot of powerful example in studies like this, which administrators would do well to reflect on and try to implement in their workplace. I will speak a little about growth, particularly the question that has been posed to me. But I eagerly reviewed where Karnataka stands in all the three pillars that Guru and others have spoken about. We are 8th in the equity list, while Andhra is the first. We are happily 2nd in the growth list of large states. And in the sustainability list, we have slipped from the first place last year to the 5th place this year. And overall, if you take the index, we are 4. Well, that is a kind of moderate performance for Karnataka, which is akin to the Hindu rate of growth. That is something like the Karnataka progress story that has, been sustained through the ages. I'm sure that, we can improve on this and we can certainly reach a better place in each of these pillars in the years to come. Question posed by Dr. Annapurna was, why have the southern states, the 5 southern states, topped the growth table? That's an interesting question, and I will be venturing into some explanations, part of which are actually value judgments and part of which may be data-based. So I think it may attract a lot of questions. I think there are, as I can make out, 5 or 6 reasons why the southern states have scored a march over the other large states in terms of being ranked high on the growth front. The first, which has also been brought out in the report, is that there has been broad-based government action, I mean state government action, in all spheres that impact on the social fabric of the country, of the state, namely health, education, water, energy, and city development. I will not expound on this because there's a time limit and there are other distinguished panelists who we are all anxious to hear. But state action being pervasive in all these areas is a common feature of all the 5 states in the south. The second, which is very important, is that of human capital formation and skills which have taken place thanks to the good technical and scientific education base, both in the public and private sectors in all these 5 states. Because of the good educational infrastructure that we have, there has been a continuous growth of human capital formation. And this human capital formation has led to a number of substantial spin-offs. Flowing from that is the third reason that I'd like to advance, which is a scientific temper. And by the way, all this is relative to those states that have not done well. A scientific temper and the ethos of entrepreneurship that we see in the southern states. Of course, Karnataka stands out in this respect, but so does Tamil Nadu and so does Andhra. But this entrepreneurship coupled with the scientific temper, to my mind, is an important distinguishing factor when we analyze the issue as to why the southern states are on top compared to the others. The fourth is the level of technology that is employed. And this level of technology, obviously it is evident in Bangalore, which is the science and technology capital of our country. It's also visible in Hyderabad. It is visible in other parts of the south. And I think this technology, especially application of technology, like in Coimbatore and other places, leads to a kind of a propulsion in the growth phenomena of these states. The fifth is the private sector, the existence of a dynamic private sector. If you, for instance, look at the 5 states on the one hand as a cluster and the non-performing big states, the absence of a private sector in these large states, which have not done well on the growth indices, is a factor that stands out. How the private sector came about, what led to its growth are issues that we can discuss and debate separately, but the prevalence of the private sector is an important factor. And the last point I'd like to make relating to why growth in the south is more than other states is that the quality of leadership that we have in the south over the years, to my mind, has been of a higher order. I'm talking of state leadership. I'm talking of the vision that our leaders have. I'm talking of their overwhelming emphasis to deliver good public services to the people, to stimulate growth and so on. To my mind, this is an important factor for the southern states standing out. Of course, in the case of Karnataka, I would also like to say that our administrative legacy, which has been bequeathed to us by our forefathers, is also a factor that stands out in comparison to the others. Now, my dear friends, when we look at the good high-performing states compared to the non-performing states, the outlier here is Maharashtra. Think about it. All the factors I mentioned, the 6 factors I mentioned, characterize the state of Maharashtra, as far as I know. Private sector, technology, human capital formation, leadership, and so on and so forth. Why then has Maharashtra lagged behind? That is something that I would like to pose before the group.
So I'll now turn to Mr. Jairaj once again.
But I want to make 2 sets of points, Guru, which I think are relevant. I grappled with the idea of how do we measure government effectiveness. And honestly, I couldn't come up with a satisfactory score for that. Because in the context of the states that have performed well on the growth factor, for instance, despite all what I have said in terms of the 6 criteria, I hesitate to say that it is government effectiveness, quote unquote, which has led to a higher growth performance. So at some time or the other, I would recommend to PAC that we must do a serious study on government effectiveness, not just by way of a critique, but also by way of suggesting how this effectiveness can be enhanced. Because I heard Sudhakar Rao say that one of the objectives of the Public Affairs Foundation was to promote capacity. I presume it is state capacity. So that is one point I want to submit to the other members of the panel and to Guru and to the others. There was a question that I really thought was very important, and that has also been featured in the report, Guru, which is that even in respect of the high-performing states, there has been a lag behind in terms of agriculture, which is an absolutely valid fact. It is true not only of the so-called high-performance states, but also the other states. And I then did a little bit of researching to see what could be the reasons for it. And I'm sure there Narendra will have a lot to say because he's a very distinguished economist. Institutionally, I think that because of the subdivision and fragmentation of holdings that we see, with the average size of holdings being less than 2 hectares, economies of scale are not possible in our agriculture. And this is really a dampener when it comes to expanding capacity, increasing production, and so on. It may be a cause of distress. The second is, and I was startled to find, Guru, that in Karnataka has the second largest arid area in India after Rajasthan. Second largest arid area. That in Karnataka, by Karnataka, all the southern states, all the states in general, subsistence agriculture is the rule, not the exception. And subsistence agriculture has not undergone a substantial change in all these years at all. And so as a result, this kind of commercial farming, all the amendments that we are seeing today in the agricultural sector are a very recent phenomena, and what impact they will have is something that I cannot assess. Third, technology. The much wanted green revolution was in respect of rice, and that was in intensive irrigation conditions with inputs being provided and so on. Post that, we've not had any kind of technology, of course, subject to correction from my friend Narendra. We've not had any kind of technology for dryland farming, for rain-fed agriculture that can really provide a buoyancy for agricultural production. And this lack of technology is not only in terms of techniques, but also in terms of, the other appurtenances for agriculture, such as storage and so on. And then, to an economist, something that will be very relevant is that the incentives that are in agriculture are very perverse compared to the private sector, compared to industry. So the minimum support price exists, but beyond that, all the gluts that take place, and we see commodities being thrown on the road and so on, all that glut that takes place is a dampener for the kind of decisions that are required to make agriculture buoyant. So although the government has a plan, the central government, that by 2022 agriculture must really come out of its shackles, I think that state governments also have not done much in this area. And I think that the lack of effectiveness of state governments to go beyond the departmental form in terms of rural area is a causatory factor for this. So those are, and finally I come back to something that Sir Arthur Lewis, again, something that Narendra can please comment on. He said in 1942, in terms of the two-gap model, that there is the two sectors, and that, if you want agriculture to grow, there has to be a mass movement of labor from agriculture to industry. And until that happens, this kind of disguised unemployment, low productivity, etc., is something that we are going to see in agriculture. I'm asking Dr. Pani, is that true? Is this duality model still valid in India today? And if so, does it account for why agriculture has not grown and the distress that farmers are facing is so live and palpable? Thank you.
Mr. Jairat, sir, with you for concluding remarks from you.
I'm really enthused that, PAC, PAF have brought about this PAI. And this has really, set me thinking on so many points. I would like to give a few suggestions to you on how you could make this more resilient in the public space. You know it as well as I do, but just from my side. One is, Guru, if with a companion piece with the PAI, if you could have some takeaways for the government. There are tables in respect of each of the pillars that say what are the high points of the pillars. But if there can be specific takeaways, then the possibility of those takeaways being kind of adopted in the governments are much higher, because the attention span in the state governments are remarkably short. It may not have increased since the time we left the government. One. Second, I'm suggesting, Guru, that close on the heels of the PAI and the report that you have done ranking states, a workshop for decision makers, a policy dialogue or something of that kind, 15, 20 decision makers from the states, may be a good idea for you to project what PAI, what PAF, your own center, what they are doing and how the state governments can make better use of it. And in that context, to also dilate a little more, as Priyanka also mentioned, and perhaps Narendra didn't because of paucity of time, on state effectiveness. Because I think finally, Guru, the entire report, correct me if I'm wrong, turns on the issue of state effectiveness. An effective state will ensure sustainability, growth, equity, because all other things are more or less equal in the states today. And finally, from what I heard the participants say, some kind of a study relating devolution of funds to the main points of this study. Because there is such an elaborate exercise that's being done. You were part of it also on this, finance commissions. Even now, NK Singh has given a report, 15th Commission report. So how do these devolution of funds impact on all these three pillars? Is there a correlation between states having access to higher funds in relation to their performance for growth, for sustainability, and for equity? I think those would be concomitants of the excellent work that you have been doing, and congratulations again from my side for the work. Thank you.
Conclude. There are a couple of questions for the panelists. I think it would be nice if they could address them quickly. One is the question from Ms. Katyayani Chamraj, an excellent question. It says, isn't the distress in agriculture because of the lack of cooperatization of farmers owning to small holdings? And she gives the example of the Amul cooperative dairy success. And isn't that the way forward, shifting more small farmers into food processing and so on?
Guru, can I respond quickly to that? Quickly?
Yes, sir. Please do, sir. Please do.
Also, to supplement what Narendra has said, empirically in Karnataka, cooperatives have worked in the area of cash crops like areca, coffee, cocoa, and so on. But it has not worked, Narendra, in terms of subsistence farming. That's a point that we can look at in greater detail as to why it has not happened.
You just need to look at the scale issue also.
Scale issue.
How much can be done within
Correct.
the scale.
So that's just a point I want to make. All the participants here and the panelists, a big thank you, Annapurna, to Mr. Ramanathan for this wonderful event.
Yes.